Hello. Today is Chapter 16, Exporting, Importing, and Counter Trade. Our objectives today are the following. Explain the promises and risks associated with exporting. Identify the steps managers can take to improve their firm's export performance. And recognize the basic steps involved in export financing. Identify information sources and government programs that exist to help exporters. And describe how counter trade can be used to facilitate exports. Exporting. Volume of export activity has increased significantly over the last 30 years, and this increase has been facilitated by the decline in trade barriers and increase in regional economic agreements. Also, advances in technology and communication, and I think they forgot transportation. The prospect of exporting is intimidating for some firms because the process can be made more problematic by shifting trade barriers. And also, another problem arises when currencies are not freely convertible. The promise and pitfalls of exporting. Exporting, large revenue and profit opportunities in foreign markets for most firms. Also, economies of scale. Large firms tend to be proactive about exporting. Medium-sized firms and small firms tend to be reactive. They may be unfamiliar or intimidated by foreign market opportunities, etc. Initial efforts may run into problems and sours companies on utilizing future ventures. Challenges to exporting include voluminous paperwork, complex formalities, potential delays and errors, and time and costs are daunting to inexperienced exporters. You've got things like documentary compliance as well as border compliance as well. In improving export performance, international comparisons, one big impediment to exporting is the simple lack of knowledge of the opportunities that are available. You need to collect information on how different countries operate. Other countries may have more experience in trade. MTI and Sogososha in Japan. U.S. has not created an institutional structure for promoting exports similar to that of Germany or Japan. Information sources within the United States include the U.S. Department of Commerce, U.S. and Foreign Commercial Service and International Trade Association, and district export councils. Additionally, you have the SBA. You also have the Small Business Development Centers, the Service Corps of Retired Executives, and Export Legal Assistance Network. In addition, the Centers for International Business Education and Research, state, regional, and city trade commissions. Service providers, you have something called freight forwarders. And these guys combine smaller shipments into a single larger shipment to minimize the shipment costs. And then they have documentation, payment, and carrier selection. Also, export management companies. They act as an export marketing department for client firms. Export trading companies. They provide comprehensive exporting services, including export documentation, logistics, and transportation. Service providers continued. They have export packaging companies, and they advise companies on appropriate design and materials for the packaging of their items. They assist companies in minimizing package to maximize the number of items to be shipped. And then we have customs brokers. They offer a complete package of services essential in dealing with potential pitfalls when a firm is exporting to many countries. Confirming houses, also known as buying agents, they represent foreign companies that want to buy your products. Export agents, merchants, and remarketers, they buy products directly from the manufacturer and package and relabel the products. Piggyback marketing, one firm distributes another firm's products, usually requires complementary products and the same target market of customers. Export processing zones, they include foreign trade zones, special economic zones, bonded warehouses, free ports, and custom zones. So, export strategy, what does that involve? Well, number one, you can hire an EMC or at least an experienced export consultant to identify opportunities and navigate the paperwork and regulations in exporting. Number two, initially focus on one market or a handful of markets. 3, enter a market on a small scale to reduce the costs of any failures. Number 4, recognize the time and managerial commitment involved in building export sales and hire additional personnel to oversee this activity. Number 5, devote attention to building strong and enduring relationships with local distributors and/or customers. Hire local personnel to help the firm establish itself in a foreign market. Also, number 7, be proactive about seeking export opportunities. And 8, retain the option of local production. The Global Edge Exporting Tool, Company Readiness to Export Tool, used to assess a company's readiness to export a product and the product's readiness to be exported. Assists firms in self-assessment of their exporting proficiency and evaluates both the firm's and the intended product's readiness to be taken internationally. It systematically identifies the firm's strengths and weaknesses within the context of exporting. Company readiness to export. In this chart, we have competitive capabilities in the domestic market, motivation for going international, commitment of owners and top management, experience in training, skills, knowledge, and resource. And that means company readiness. Here's the screenshot of a select result from the Global Edge Core Company Readiness to Export Diagnostic Tool. It shows organizational readiness here, and it tells you the name of the company and description of what you're doing. Export and import financing. Well, there is a lack of trust. Firms engaged in international trade have to trust somebody. They may have never seen them, they live in a different country, they speak a different language, and also they abide by a different legal system. Who could be very difficult to track down if he or she defaults on an obligation. Preference of the U.S. exporter. Importer pays for the goods. You have an American exporter here. Exporter ships the goods after being paid to the French importer. And that's the cycle that works here. Preference of the French, the other way around. The use of a third party. This is where everything comes together. So importer obtains bank promise to pay on importer's behalf. 2, bank promises exporter to pay on behalf of importer. And then the whole thing processes and goes through. Letter of credit. This states that the bank will pay a specified sum to a beneficiary, normally the exporter, upon presentation of specified documents. It's issued by a bank at the request of the importer. Companies are likely to trust reputable banks, and the importer must pay a fee. Draft bill of exchange, normally used in international commerce to effect payment. It indicates specified amounts of money to be paid at a specified time. It's used to settle trade transactions. In domestic transactions, the buyer can often obtain possession of the merchandise without signing a formal document acknowledging his or her obligation to pay. In international transactions, payment or a formal promise to pay is required before the buyer can obtain the merchandise. Draft bill of exchange continued here. Sight draft payable on presentation to the drawee. A time draft promised to pay by the accepting party at some future date. When a time draft is drawn on and accepted by a bank, it is called a banker's acceptance. When it is drawn on and accepted by a business firm, it is called a trade acceptance. And these are negotiable instruments. A bill of lading. 3 purposes. It's a receipt, it's a contract, and a document of title. Can also function as collateral against which funds may be advanced to the exporter by its local bank before or during shipment and before final payment by the importer. A typical international trade transaction. Importer orders the goods. Exporter agrees to fill the order. Importer arranges for the letter of credit. And then we go to number 4. Bank of Paris sends letter to the credit to the Bank of New York. And then we go to 5. Bank of New York informs exporter of the letter of credit. Then we go to 6. Goods shipped to France. Number 7. Exporter presents a draft to bank. Then we go to 8. Bank of New York presents draft to Paris. 9. Paris returns accepted draft. Then we go to 10, 11, 12, and 13, etc. The Export-Import Bank assists in the financing of U.S. exports of products and services to support U.S. employment and market competitiveness. supplements private capital lending with various loan and loan guarantee programs, guarantees repayment of medium and long-term loans that U.S. commercial banks make to foreign borrowers for purchasing U.S. exports. It also lends dollars to foreign borrowers for use in purchasing U.S. exports. Then you have something called export credit insurance. The lack of a letter of credit exposes the exporter to the risk that the foreign importer will default on payment. The exporter can insure against this possibility by buying export credit insurance, and it's provided by the Foreign Credit Insurance Association. Countertrade, trade of goods and services for other goods and services, alternative means of structuring an international sale when conventional means of payment are difficult, costly, or non-existent. It's like a barter-like agreement. The popularity of countertrade. Popular among developing nations that lack the foreign exchange reserves required to purchase necessary imports. World trade covered by some sort of countertrade agreement grew from 2 to 10% a decade ago to about 20 to 25% today. So there's been a huge growth in countertrade. The types of countertrade, we have barter, direct exchange of goods and or services between two parties without a cash transaction, counter purchase, reciprocal buying agreement, and then an offset, an agreement to purchase goods and services with a specified percentage of proceeds from an original sale in that country from any firm in the country. Types of counter trading continued, switch trading, the use of a specialized third-party trading house in a counter trade arrangement. Compensation or buybacks, an agreement to accept a percentage of a plant's output as payment for contract to build a plant. Pros and cons of counter trade. The pros, it can give a firm a way to finance an export deal when other means are not available. A counter trade agreement may be required by the government of a country to which a firm is exporting goods or services. It also can become a strategic marketing weapon. Cons. Firms will normally prefer to be paid in hard currency. It may involve the exchange of unusable or poor quality goods that the firm cannot dispose of profitably. Counter trade is most attractive to large, diverse, multinational enterprises that can use their worldwide network of contacts to dispose of goods acquired in counter trading. The 360 view, impact of the macro environment, important factors we have here. Changes in trade barriers can affect export strategy. Must weigh attractiveness of exporting as a strategy against pros and cons of establishing production facilities in the target country. And you need to keep tabs on the relative movements of currencies against each other. Must consider the long-term economic prospects of a country before deciding whether it will make sense to invest time, effort, and money in building export sales there. I thank you for listening.